A fist slammed down on the counter hard enough to rattle the sugar jars. Coins scattered across the formica and spun onto the floor. A big man in a cracked leather jacket dropped to his knees, chasing them, counting under his breath. Nickels, dimes, pennies worn smooth and gray with age. He was trying to buy a plate of eggs and a cup of coffee, and he was $3 short. His hands were shaking, not from cold, from shame. Behind the register, an old beagle lifted his gray head and watched him. The waitress watched too. Her name was Loretta Hale, and she had $11 to her name and a stack of bills she couldn't pay. She looked at the man on the floor. What she did next would, 1 week later, bring 300 strangers thundering into her gravel lot. Why? Stay with me on this one. The Whistle Stop Diner sat at the far edge of Junction Flats, Arizona, right where the highway bends away toward somewhere better. Once, this had been a railroad town. Trains stopped here. Men worked the yard, and the diner stayed full from dawn to midnight. But the train stopped coming a long time ago. The yard rusted. The young people left. And now most nights, the only sound in the place was the hum of the old cooler and the tick of a clock nobody had bothered to fix. Loretta Hale had worked that diner for 31 years. She'd started as a girl carrying plates for tips, and somewhere along the way she'd ended up owning the place. Not because she wanted to. Because her husband Ray left it to her when his heart quit on him one January morning, and she couldn't bear to let it go. It was the last thing that still had his fingerprints on it. She was 58 now, gray coming in at her temples, hands rough from 30 years of hot plates and dishwater. She worked the night shift alone because she couldn't afford to pay anybody else. The only company she had was a fat, arthritic old beagle named Diesel, who slept by the register and lifted his head whenever the door opened, just in case it was somebody worth greeting. Now here's the thing you have to understand about Loretta. She was broke, not the kind of broke where you skip a vacation, the kind where you sort the mail into piles and the biggest pile is the one you can't open. There was a notice from the bank sitting under the sugar jar that very night, and she knew what it said without reading it again. 90 days. That's what they'd given her. 90 days to catch up on what she owed, or they'd take the diner and sell the land out from under her. She had $11 in her apron and maybe 40 in the register. That was the whole empire. So when the door swung open a little after 11 that night and the cold desert air rolled in with the low rumble of an engine dying in the lot, Loretta didn't expect much. Truckers sometimes. Lost tourists, but this was a biker, a big one. Military big, thick through the shoulders, with a gray beard and a face that looked like it had been left out in the weather for 60 years. His leather jacket was cracked and faded, patched in a dozen places. He had rode dust in every line of his skin. He sat at the counter, way down at the end, and he studied the menu like it was written in a language he was trying to remember. "Coffee," he said finally. His voice was low and rough. "And how much are the eggs?" $3.75, Loretta said. "Comes with toast and potatoes." He nodded slowly. Then he reached into his jacket and started laying money on the counter, and that's when she saw it. He wasn't pulling out bills, he was pulling out coins. Quarters, nickels, dimes, a few pennies worn smooth. He counted them into little stacks, his big fingers moving careful and slow, and his lips moved while he counted. He got to the end of what he had and he stopped. He was short. She could see it on his face before he said a word. He looked at the little piles of change like they might grow if he stared hard enough, and then he did that thing that proud men do when they're ashamed. He swallowed. He straightened up, and he started gathering the coins back toward himself. "You know what," he said, "just the coffee, forget the eggs. I'm not that hungry anyway." But his hands were shaking, and Loretta had raised no children and buried one husband and served 10,000 strangers across a counter, and she knew a hungry man when she saw one. She knew the difference between a man who didn't want to eat and a man who couldn't afford to. She didn't say anything about it. That was the important part. She didn't make it a thing. She just turned around, cracked 3 eggs onto the grill, dropped a double order of potatoes beside them, and slid 2 slices of bread into the toaster. The whole place filled up with the smell of it. "Ma'am," the biker said, "I told you I can't." "Kitchen made a mistake," Loretta said without turning around. "Already cooked. I just have to throw it out. You'd be doing me a favor." He looked at her for a long second, like he was trying to decide whether to argue. Then something in him gave way, the way a man's shoulders drop when he finally sets down a weight he's carried too far. He picked up the fork, and he ate like a man who hadn't eaten in 2 days, which, it turned out, he hadn't. She refilled his coffee twice and didn't charge him for either. Diesel, who was picky about people, hauled himself up off his blanket, waddled over, and put his gray chin on the man's boot. The biker reached down without a word and scratched the dog behind the ears like they were old friends. They talked a little, not much. He told her he'd been on the road a long time, said he'd lost his wife 3 winters back and hadn't quite figured out how to stop moving since. Said the bike was about all he had left, and even that was running on prayers. He said some nights he'd pull over just to hear the quiet, and the quiet was the worst part because there was nobody in it. Loretta understood that better than he knew. She told him about Ray, about the diner, about how the trains used to stop here, and how the whole town used to smell like coal smoke and coffee on a winter morning, and how you could feel it in the floorboards when the 415 came through. At one point, his eyes drifted up to the wall behind the register, where a faded photograph hung crooked in a dime store frame. 2 young men, arms slung over each other's shoulders, standing in front of a line of motorcycles. One of them was clearly Ray, 40 years younger, grinning like the world owed him nothing. The biker looked at that picture a long time. Something moved across his face that Loretta couldn't read. "That your husband?" he asked. "That's my Ray, long time ago. He rode back before I knew him. Ran with some club up out of Flagstaff. He gave it up when we married." Said the road was no place to grow old. She smiled a little. "He grew old right here instead." The biker didn't answer right away. He set his coffee down, careful, like it had gotten heavier. "The road takes more than it gives," he said. "Man's lucky if he figures that out young. Sounds like your Ray did." He nodded slow and went back to his cup, but his jaw was tight and his eyes stayed wet at the edges, and Loretta figured he was thinking about his own wife, and she let him be. When he was done, he tried one more time to pay. He pushed every coin he had across the counter. Loretta pushed it right back. "It's on the house," she said. "House rules. Nobody rides out of here hungry." "That's not," he stopped. Cleared his throat. "Nobody does that anymore." "Well," she said, "I'm not everybody." He stood up. He was even bigger standing than sitting. He looked around that empty, worn-out little diner, at the cracked stools and the notice sticking out from under the sugar jar, and Loretta had the strange feeling he was memorizing it. Then he pulled something off his jacket. A small metal pin, an old one, shaped like a pair of wings with something stamped in the middle she couldn't make out. He set it on the counter next to Diesel's water bowl. "For the dog's collar," he said, "or wherever, just keep it somewhere." And before she could ask what it meant, he pushed through the door, threw a leg over that beat-up old machine, and kicked it to life. The engine coughed, caught, and settled into a rumble. She watched his taillight shrink down the highway until the dark swallowed it whole. Then she cleaned his plate, wiped down the counter, and forgot the whole thing. Believe me, she forgot it by morning. When you're drowning, you don't remember the small kindnesses you hand out. You're too busy going under. Because the next morning, things got worse. A man she'd never seen walked into the whistle stop wearing a pressed shirt and shoes that had never touched gravel before that day. He set a leather folder on the counter and ordered a coffee he didn't drink. He was from the bank, not the local branch. The regional office, the one 3 hours away that made decisions about places it never had to look at. He was polite. That was the worst part. He smiled the whole time he explained that there was a buyer interested in the whole strip of highway frontage, a developer out of Phoenix, and that it would be, in his words, cleaner for everyone if Loretta agreed to let the property go now rather than dragging it out. "You've got 90 days on paper," he said, sliding a pen toward her. "But between us, that clock can get real short if the buyer walks. This offer won't sit forever." Loretta looked at the pen. She looked at the folder. She looked at the little chip in the counter where Ray used to set his coffee every morning for 30 years, worn pale by the same mug in the same spot. And she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time, which was pure, cold fear. She didn't sign. She told him she needed to think. He left his card, told her not to think too long, and drove off in a car that cost more than the diner had made all year. That week was the longest of her life. She called everyone she could think of. The regional office wouldn't budge, no matter how many times they moved her from one polite voice to the next. Ray's old friends were dead or gone. She drove out to the last address she had for his club up near Flagstaff, and it was a laundromat now. The town had maybe 200 people left in it, and most of them were as broke as she was. She sold her wedding ring at a pawn shop 2 towns over, stood at the glass case while a stranger weighed the only thing she had left of her marriage on a little scale and put the money against the loan, and it didn't even make a dent. It was like throwing a bucket of water at a house fire. And somewhere in the middle of all that running around, she stopped running. It happened on a Thursday night. Slow, even for the whistle stop. No customers at all. Loretta locked the front door early, poured herself a cup of the coffee she'd normally throw out, and sat down at the counter on the customer side for once. Diesel climbed up onto the stool beside her, which he wasn't allowed to do, and she didn't stop him. She looked around the place, really looked. And a strange calm came over her. She thought, all right, maybe this is how it ends. Maybe some things just run their course and you have to let them go. She'd had 31 good years in this room. She'd loved a good man in it. That was more than a lot of people got. She reached over and scratched Diesel's ears, and she noticed, for the first time since that night, the little metal pin still sitting by his water bowl where the biker had left it. She picked it up, turned it over in her fingers and set it down again. Just an old man's keepsake, she figured. A thank you from a stranger passing through. She finished her coffee. She turned off the lights. She went home and slept better than she had in weeks, because there's a strange peace that comes when you finally stop fighting. She thought the story was over. It was just getting started. 6 days after the biker rode off, the quiet shattered a little after dawn. A diesel engine, the truck kind, not the dog, came grinding into the gravel lot, and behind it a flatbed hauling a small yellow excavator. Loretta came out onto the diner steps in her robe with a coffee pot still in her hand, and there was the man from the bank, pressed shirt and all, standing beside a second man in a hard hat holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Hale," the bank man smiled that smile. "I tried to call. The buyer accelerated. I'm afraid the timelines moved up considerably." Loretta's mouth went dry. "Moved up to when?" "The survey starts today. We'll need you cleared out by the end of the week." He said it as gently as a man can say a thing like that, which somehow made it worse. "I did warn you the clock could get short." Now here's where the whole thing changed, because up until that morning this had been Loretta's private fight. Her debt, her diner, her slow, quiet drowning, something she could lose with a little dignity in her own time. But now there was a machine in her lot and a stranger in a hard hat measuring her land like she was already gone. It wasn't personal anymore. It was a system. A buyer she'd never met, a bank 3 hours away, a set of papers that moved whether she agreed or not. She was one small woman standing on the steps of a dying diner, and the whole thing was rolling over her like she wasn't even there. She set the coffee pot down on the step so they wouldn't see her hands shake. "You can't just," she started. "I'm afraid we can," the bank man said. "Not cruel, just certain." He said it the way you'd read a weather report, and that certainty was the most frightening thing she'd ever heard, because you can argue with a cruel man. You can't argue with a man who's already sure. The man in the hard hat climbed up onto the excavator. The engine turned over, and Loretta stood there in her robe in front of the only thing she had left in the world, with absolutely nothing left to fight it with. That's when they all heard it. A single motorcycle coming up the highway, slow and steady. It turned into the lot, gravel crunching under the tires, and rolled to a stop right between Loretta and the excavator. The rider cut the engine. He was younger than the first biker, maybe 40, with a trimmed beard and hard eyes and a leather vest covered in patches. He took off his sunglasses and looked at the man in the hard hat, then at the bank man, then up at Loretta on the steps. "Morning," he said, calm as Sunday. "This the Whistle Stop, Loretta Hale's place." "Who's asking?" the bank man said. The rider ignored him completely. He looked only at Loretta. "Ma'am, a week ago you fed a man named Gideon Marsh." Big fella, gray beard, riding a busted-up shovelhead that had no business still running. He almost smiled. "We call him Preacher." Loretta's heart was pounding. Yes, the eggs, I didn't do anything, I just gave him breakfast." "Yes, ma'am," the rider said. "You surely did." He looked around the lot, at the excavator, at the folder in the bank man's hand, and his jaw tightened. "And it seems we got here just in time." "Got here for what?" Loretta whispered. The rider swung off his bike. He walked up to the steps, unhurried, boots loud on the gravel in all that quiet, and out of his vest he pulled the same thing the old man had left on her counter. A small metal pin, wings with a mark stamped in the middle. He held it up next to the one she'd been carrying in her apron pocket ever since that night. The two of them identical, catching the morning light. "That pin Preacher gave you," he said quietly, "isn't a keepsake, ma'am, it's a marker. Been part of our brotherhood for 50 years. When one of us gives it to somebody, it means that person did something that can't go unpaid." He closed his hand around it. "There's only about 30 of those in the whole world, and Preacher gave one to you." Loretta didn't understand. Not yet. But she felt something enormous shifting under her feet, like the ground itself was turning over. "If you're still with me, and I hope you are, because this is where it turns, do me a small favor and hit that subscribe button." Stories like this one are the whole reason this channel exists, and I've got more of them coming. All right, back to that gravel lot. The rider turned to the bank man. "How much does she owe?" The bank man blinked. "That's confidential." "How much?" Not a question this time. The bank man named a number. It was a big number. It was the number that had been eating Loretta alive for a year, the one she saw on the ceiling every night before sleep finally took her. And the rider just nodded like a man hearing the price of a used truck. "Shut the machine off," he said to the hard hat. "You're not surveying anything today." Something in the way he said it made the man reach over and kill the engine without even looking at the bank man for permission. The lot went dead silent. The rider pulled out a phone, walked a few steps away, and made a call Loretta couldn't hear. She caught 2 words. A name, maybe, and the word "yeah," said soft, like a promise. When he came back, he climbed onto his bike, fired it up, and looked at her one last time. "You go on and open up like normal, Mrs. Hale," he said. "Every day this week. Don't sign a thing, don't sell a thing." He put his sunglasses back on. 7 days. You just be standing behind that counter 7 days from now. That's all you got to do. "Wait," Loretta called out. "Wait, who are you people?" But he was already rolling out of the lot. And the bank man was standing there in his pressed shirt with his folder hanging loose at his side, looking for the first time like a man who'd lost the thread of his own plan. Those 7 days crawled. Loretta did exactly what the writer told her. She opened the diner every morning. She kept the notice under the sugar jar. She didn't sign the bank's papers, and she didn't call the number on the card, and every night she lay awake wondering if she'd dreamed the whole thing. A part of her was sure she had. Men on motorcycles don't fix a woman's life. That's not how the world works. She'd learned that a long time ago, and she'd learned it more than once. The bank man called twice. She let it ring. The third time he left a message, and his voice had lost some of that smooth certainty. He said the buyer had questions. He said he hoped there wasn't going to be any trouble. Loretta played it back once and then set the phone face down on the counter and didn't touch it again. On the 7th day, a Saturday, she got up before dawn. She fed Diesel. She put on her good apron, the one without the burn marks. She didn't know why. She just felt like she ought to. She made the coffee, flipped the sign to open, and stood behind the counter, and she waited. Morning came. Nothing. A trucker stopped for pancakes and left. The sun climbed. By noon, Loretta felt like a fool, standing there in her good apron waiting for a miracle. She caught herself watching the bend in the highway and made herself stop. By 2 o'clock, she'd about given up. She'd started to take the apron off. And then Diesel lifted his head. The old dog came up off his blanket and pointed his nose at the door, ears working, and a second later Loretta felt it before she heard it. A vibration, coming up through the floor, through the soles of her shoes, into her chest. Then the sound arrived. A low thunder far off, rolling in from the highway. It grew and it grew, and it did not stop growing. She came around the counter and pushed open the door. They filled the highway as far as she could see. Motorcycles, headlight after headlight, riding 2 and 3 abreast. A river of chrome and leather coming straight down the road toward Junction Flats. The thunder of it shook the windows in their frames. It rolled into the gravel lot, and it kept coming, bike after bike after bike, until the lot was full, and then the shoulder of the highway, and then the old railroad yard across the way where no engine had run in 50 years. 300 riders, maybe more. Men and women, gray-bearded and young, patches from a dozen states, all of them pulling in and cutting their engines one by one until a silence fell over that little town so total you could hear the flags snapping on their antennas. The whole town had come out. 200 souls standing on porches and sidewalks staring, because nothing like this had happened in Junction Flats in 50 years. And through the crowd, walking slow, came the old man, Gideon Marsh, preacher. The same cracked jacket, the same weathered face. But he stood different now, and the riders parted for him like he was somebody. Because he was. Beside him walked the younger rider from a week before. Preacher stopped at the foot of the diner steps and took off his hat. "Ma'am," he said, "I owe you an apology. I let you think I was nobody." He looked around at the 300. "My name's Gideon Marsh. 50 years ago I helped start a motorcycle club called the Iron Wardens. And a long time before that, when I was young and stupid and near starving on the side of a road outside Flagstaff, a man I'd never met stopped and gave me his own coat and every dollar in his pocket and never asked my name." His voice cawed. "That man was Ray Hale. Your husband." Loretta's hand went to her mouth. "I didn't know it was his place when I walked in here," Preacher said. "Not till I saw his picture on your wall. Ray carried me through the worst year of my life, and I never got to pay him back before he passed. I figured that debt died with him." He shook his head slowly. "And then his widow, who's got nothing, who's about to lose everything, cooks me eggs she can't afford and won't take my coins. Wouldn't even let me say thank you." He climbed the first step. "The Iron Wardens don't forget a debt, Mrs. Hale. Not his, not yours." The younger rider came forward and put a leather satchel into Preacher's hands, and Preacher held it out to her. "We passed the word, chapters all over this country. Every man and woman here put in what they could, and a lot of folks who couldn't ride sent it anyway." He pressed the satchel into her arms. "That's your loan paid in full, every cent. The land, the diner, all of it, free and clear. There's a lawyer standing in your lot right now to make sure that bank makes it official today." Loretta couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She stood there on the steps of Ray's diner with a bag of money in her arms and 300 strangers looking up at her, and the tears just ran right down her face. The bank man was there, at the edge of the crowd, pale as paper. Somebody had already called his regional office. The buyer, it turned out, did not want 300 motorcycles associated with his development. The deal was dead by sundown. Loretta finally found her voice. It came out small. "I only made you breakfast," she said. Preacher smiled and his eyes were wet. "Ma'am," he said, "you have no idea what a plate of eggs is worth to a man who's got nothing left." They stayed the whole weekend. 300 riders in a town of 200 people, and you'd think that would be chaos. It wasn't. It was the best 2 days Junction Flats had seen in half a century. They packed the whistle stop from open to close. Loretta cooked until her feet gave out, and when they did, riders she'd never met tied on aprons and worked the grill beside her. Somebody fixed the clock that hadn't run in years. Somebody else patched the cracked front step. A woman with silver hair and forearms full of tattoos reorganized the whole storeroom without being asked. They didn't just pay her debt. They put money in the jukebox and money in the register and money in the tip jar. And when a young rider tried to leave without paying, an older one grabbed him by the collar and made him pay double, and everybody laughed. And Diesel, old, arthritic, picky Diesel, waddled from boot to boot getting scratched, and let 300 strangers love on him like he'd been waiting his whole life for the company. Before they rode out on Sunday, Preacher took the little metal pin, the one Loretta had carried in her apron ever since that night, and he fixed it to a strip of leather and buckled it around Diesel's collar himself. "Now it's official," he said. "This diner's under our protection. Anybody gives you trouble misses. Hale, you call the number on this card and you will not believe how fast the cavalry comes." He tucked a card into her apron pocket right where the pin had been. "And we'll be back through. Regular. This is a warden stop now. You just keep the coffee on." Then he did something she didn't expect. He pulled her into a hug, this enormous old man, and he held her the way a brother holds a sister, and he whispered so only she could hear it. "Ray'd be proud of you. He always did say you were the best of the two of us." And then they were gone. 300 engines firing up at once, a thunder rolling out of Junction Flats and down the highway, taillights shrinking into the distance until the desert swallowed them whole, the same way it had swallowed one lonely biker a week before. The diner was quiet again, but it was a different quiet, a full quiet. Loretta stood behind her counter that night, the notice gone from under the sugar jar for good, the register fuller than it had been in years, and the deed to the place sitting clean and clear in a drawer with nobody's name on it but her own. She poured herself a cup of coffee. Diesel climbed up onto the stool beside her, pin gleaming on his collar, and this time she didn't tell him to get down. She thought about that first night, the coins on the floor. A big man on his knees, ashamed, $3 short trying to buy a plate of eggs. How close she'd come to just ringing up his coffee and letting him go hungry into the dark. How a whole life can turn on one small choice you make when you think nobody's watching. Somebody's always watching. That's the thing Loretta learned. Maybe not the way you'd think, but the kindness you hand out when you've got nothing left, when there's no reward in sight and no one to see it, that kindness doesn't just disappear. It goes out into the dark on 2 wheels, And sometimes, when you least expect it, it comes thundering back. She never did fix the crack in the highway where it bends away towards somewhere better. But she stopped looking down it, wondering when her luck would leave. Because for the first time in a long time, everything she needed was right there in that little room. And every now and then, late at night, when the cooler hums and the clock ticks and the old dog snores by the register, Loretta Hale still cracks 3 eggs onto the grill for anybody who wanders in off that road with empty pockets and a proud, hungry face. Nobody rides out of the whistle stop hungry. House rules.